hit on some important things. First of all, I just want to talk about there's three isms that we did in chapter 19 that are important, and they're a little easy to confuse. The first ism is this idea of communism. And with communism, remember, you have this idea that the economy drives history, and especially class economic conflict drives history. So communism has its focus on economics, on money, on wealth, especially how wealth is being distributed unfairly in the Industrial Revolution, right? Remember, Karl Marx is reacting to these problems that he sees in the Industrial Revolution. So when you think communism, think economy, and think of how class and economic conflict is driving history. That's what he's focusing on. And he's hoping for this kind of communist revolution, and we'll come back to that later. So we already did the announcements. We also had this ideology of nationalism. And nationalism, you'll notice, looks a lot, in many ways, like liberalism. You recall liberalism, liberalism, sorry, we'll start with liberalism. Liberalism, you remember, is this idea that sovereignty comes from the people. And one way you can think about liberalism, if you're an American, it's just our government. The United States government is a liberal government. If you're from the Republic of Korea, it's a liberal government. It's the same kind of thing. Britain is a liberal government. So liberalism is pretty easy to remember, I think. Sovereignty is from the people. Your basic rights are guaranteed, often by a written constitution. And connected to this idea is this idea that you get a vote. And the economic values are very different from communism. The economic values are those of Adam Smith, which are free trade, free markets, and so forth. Economic freedom, right, is the hallmark of liberalism as well. So you have these ideas that are really focused on the people, right? It's not focused on kings. It's not focused on nobles. It's focused on the people, including the common people in many respects. That's sometimes limited because not everyone can always vote, but the idea is that sovereignty comes from the people, not from the king, and people should have these kind of basic rights, and one of these basic rights is voting. So that's liberalism. And then the last one we talked about was this kind of idea of nationalism, which we connected to the Psy video. And nationalism is very similar to liberalism. This is important. Liberals are often nationalists. Communists were often nationalists. Right? You could be a communist and a nationalist, which is kind of weird. We'll talk about why later on. And you could be a liberal and a nationalist. There's no problem. In nationalism, sovereignty comes from the nation or group of people. So you can see that's very similar to liberalism, right? Liberalism, sovereignty comes from the people. In nationalism, sovereignty comes from the nation, which is a group of people. And each nation should have its own state. Each one of these groups of people should have its own state. It's kind of similar with liberalism, right? You get to each group of people have their own state, which they kind of help govern. What's really important, though, in nationalism, the nation state is supposed to be your primary loyalty. The nation state is supposed to be your primary loyalty. Above your church, above your family, above everything else, you're supposed to sacrifice for the good of the nation state. And part of this also had this idea, and this is one reason I like to show that Psy video, is the idea from subjects to citizens. A subject is a person who's ruled by a king. If you're a subject, you're ruled by a king, right? You're ruled by someone. And you can think about that like Louis XIV and his peasants, right? He just tells the peasants, hey, you got to pay taxes, do what I say, don't rebel, and don't complain, right? Divine right, royal absolutism, your people are subjects. Your people are subjects, right? They're not supposed to do anything other than pay their taxes, don't rebel, and don't complain. All of us here, though, none of us are subjects. We're all citizens. We're all citizens. Citizens are supposed to actively take part in the life of the nation state. Citizens are supposed to actively take part. You're supposed to actively help government And if you're a member of a democracy, you're supposed to actively participate in the government, right? In November, all of us were supposed to go out and vote. Do our patriotic duty, go out and vote. We were supposed to actively participate in the government. So this is an important change that you have in nationalism. You go from being someone who's just told what to do to being someone who actively participates in the government. And that gives these new governments, these new nation states, a lot of power. That's one reason, remember, the British people were willing to trust their government. Their government was a democracy, and they saw themselves as connected to their government, so they were willing to trust their money to the government, which allowed them to beat France. Nationalism makes you powerful. And you can kind of think of this with the Psy video. Remember, in the Psy video, you had some athletes, but most of the people were just average, everyday people. And if you ever, is anyone here familiar, what do we mean if we say home court advantage?
It's like your home. Yeah.
Right, your home. And what happens, but what do you get, why is it an advantage to be at your, or I think, Mikhail, you're a basketball player? Would you rather play at home or away? Home, why?
Because you shoot on those goals every day.
Right, you're used to it, exactly. Is there anything else that helps you?
Yeah,
People, right, the crowd, exactly. The crowd's there cheering for you. In nationalism, the crowd is included. Where we saw it in the video, all the people were coming out saying, go Korea, yeah. And of course, the Korean athletes are going to do that much better. If they don't have that crowd, they're not going to do as well. It's the same thing with governments. If the government's just the government trying to win a war, it's not going to do well. If the government's got the people behind them, actively supporting that war, they're going to win. That's why nationalism gives you power. Right? It involves everyone together, as we saw in that video. And this will become more important as we continue on with our class. So that gets us, that's what I wanted to review. First thing I just want to note, though, about the, if you had does anyone need a review sheet? This would be a good time if you, so let's see, so we want to get the review sheets out here because I have a couple corrections to make based on how far. You're welcome. Because I have to hand out the review sheets early, I have to guess how far we're going to get. So we don't necessarily cover everything. So under chapter 19 of the review sheet, please delete this last question. How did Britain successfully deal with the difficult economic political issues it faced? We didn't deal with it, so it's not going to be on the test. So please delete that one. And then under what is nationalism? What is nationalism will be on the test. But how was it spread and how did it threaten multi-ethnic empires will not be on the test. So please delete how was it spread, how did it threaten multi-empires, and also how did Britain successfully deal with so on. So delete those questions. They will not be on this test. They will be on test 2, not test 1. I just want to say a few things about the test before we continue, just about generally taking a test. So whenever people have trouble with the test, I like to talk about them about their test. And I want to pass on what I've learned to you in hopes that it may be helpful. Many people have test anxiety. Many people are afraid of taking tests, and that's normal, right? I mean, tests are not fun. No, I don't know of anyone who really enjoys taking a test. It's stressful. You're expected to, what you've learned over the last 4 weeks, much of which is new, you're supposed to be able to write down correctly, and your future in part depends on how well you do. It's not easy, it's a little scary. Here's the problem though, psychologically, if we don't like, if we're in an uncomfortable situation, like let's say I have to talk to someone that I don't want to talk to, I want to get out of that conversation as soon as possible and get away from that person. We do that same thing with tests. If you're taking a test, it's like talking to someone you don't want to talk to. So your instinct is just to get the darn thing done and leave because it's uncomfortable. I want you to recognize that's something psychologically we go through, so if you have that happen to you on the test, you can overcome it. Just remind yourself, okay, I'm just uncomfortable, I need to sit here and use my time. Because a lot of times what I find is people will, because they have this anxiety, will miss questions because they don't answer them. They will just leave out a multiple choice question. I mean, there's no reason not to answer multiple choice. Right? You don't lose points by guessing. Right? You at least have a 25% chance, at least guess. But what happened was these people, I think, were very uncomfortable. They just wanted to get the test done and leave, and so they didn't check. So recheck your answers, please. Make sure to go over them at least once, perhaps twice, if you have the time. You should have plenty of time to finish this test. Also, and this is related to test anxiety, go with your gut. And what I mean by that is usually your first answer is the right one. I don't know how many times I have seen a student have the correct answer and then erase it and then circle an incorrect answer. That happens all the time. And what it is, that's that anxiety. You're second guessing yourself. So usually, statistically speaking, your first answer is your correct one. Only change an answer if you can think of a really good reason. Don't change it because, oh, I feel like maybe it's right. No. Only change it if you can rationally think of a reason to change it. The last thing that happens, I'll often have people do really well on the old material and not do well on the new material. That seems really weird, right? Why would you do better on the old material than the new material? This is why. People study the old material more than the new material. Psychologically, we think, okay, the new material is new, we just studied it, I know it. Most of the review questions that people ask me are not from the new material, it's the old material. That's fine, but be careful about that. Don't just study the old material. Make sure you also review the new material. Because I had so many times where people would get an A on the old material, but a D on the new material. Okay, so I want to encourage you to also recheck the old stuff. And then someone asked me a question well, first of all, thank you everyone who asked questions, right? I should have emailed you back. If I didn't email you back, please let me know. And I've recorded, you'll get your bonus. And that's very helpful, not just for you, but also for your peers, because it tells me where people are having trouble. So we'll focus on that material today. One student did ask a question that is not on the study guide, so I feel like I should still answer it though. Can you explain how Frederick the Great turned science into power? And that's a term. Right? Remember, Frederick the Great, we watched the video, he's the guy that realized that with good math, with advanced mathematics, you can have accurate artillery. If you have accurate artillery, you can win battles. Right? Accurate artillery allows you to win battles. And science allows you to do that. So he connected that science can make your government powerful by making the military powerful. So, okay. So what we'll do for this, essentially, we'll just go through, where did I lost my eraser, I think.
No, it's under there.
Oh, it's under there. Thank you very much, Josie. What we'll do now is we'll just go, I bolded the parts that people ask questions about. So I figured those are the things that are the hardest, so we'll just go through and work on those. And if we have time left, then what we'll do is we'll just open it up for any questions people might have. So the first question that people had questions with was, how are the Chinese and Japanese emperors different? Okay, so let's start with China. Right? What can you tell me about the Chinese emperor?
Mandate of heaven.
Mandate of heaven. So he's emperor because of the mandate of heaven. Let's see if I can. I think that's right. I don't know. Close enough? Oh. Thank you. Forgot the line. China has the mandate of heaven, right? So you are chosen because you're the most virtuous person to rule all under the heaven, and so are your descendants, right? The heaven doesn't choose a new person each generation. They choose a virtuous person and his descendants to rule. That's the mandate of heaven. Can you lose it? Yeah, okay. In Japan, though, you also have an emperor. Right, you have a shogun. Right, so you have an emperor and you have a shogun. What's their relationship? Right, emperor chooses shogun. Well, wait a second, why is the emperor going to do that? Why is he emperor? Right, descendant of Amaterasu. It's okay, the A lady, I won't ask you. Sun goddess, that's the easy, she's the sun goddess. That's an easy way to remember. Right, the emperor chooses the shogun, and he gets to choose, the emperor gets to do that because he is the descendant of the sun goddess. Can he lose? Can he cease being emperor? Can he lose the... No, right, because he's the descendant of the sun goddess. He's always the descendant of the sun goddess. This is why China has many dynasties, Japan only has one dynasty. Politically speaking, does the emperor do anything else other than choose the shogun? No, right. The emperor of Japan has a religious role, but not a political one. Right? The emperor of Japan has a religious role, but not a political one. How about China? Does he have a religious role? Yes, right. The emperor was doing the sacrifice to heaven, so he has a religious role. Does he have a political role? Yes.
Oh, he does.
That's why you have to overthrow him. If you want to change things, you got to get rid of him because he has a political role. Whereas Japanese emperor, you don't need to get rid of him. You keep him around and use him. So one of the big things, of course, is how they get it, right? You have mandate of heaven versus descendant of the sun goddess. So they're different in how they're chosen, how the dynasty is chosen. And the other big thing is that China has a religious and political function. The Chinese emperor has a religious and political function. In Japan, there's religious but not political. There's religious but not political. And this is, again, where note cards are useful. Because if you're not used to dealing with China and Japan, it's easy to confuse them. I see a lot of times where, in previous times I've taught this course, where people would get the right content, but the wrong country. Right? They'll get the right content, they'll say Japan, or they'll say one emperor did this, and this other emperor didn't do this, but they'll switch China and Japan. So this is what's really hard about this course, is keeping all these different places straight. But you just want to remember China, mandate of heaven, religious and political. Japan, descendant of sun goddess, religious rule but not a political one. And one way to remember this is simply to remember the Japanese flag. Got a picture of a sun on it. Right? Japan, Japanese flag, picture of a sun, descendant of sun goddess. That means he's religious, not political. That can maybe help. Little tricks like that can help you remember these things. Usually the sillier the better. Anything that will help you remember. Another question we had was, why did Japan choose to turn away from the West and Western science and technology? I think this is one where it's good to go back to the PowerPoint. One reason I want to go back to the PowerPoint is remember when I make the tests are based on the study guide, which is based off the PowerPoint. So the PowerPoints are what's kind of in my mind when I'm working on the study guide, which is what's in my mind when I'm working on the test. So it's good to go back. One way to possibly study for this, in part, is to look at the PowerPoints on one side and the review sheet on the next side and try and answer the questions based on the PowerPoints. I encourage you to write those down as well, the answers. That can help you to remember it. But remember, I choose pictures on purpose. And one thing I wanted people to remember was that Japan was in a civil war from the mid-15th century to 1603. And that's why I had this picture, because it's easy to remember. Everyone's fighting. This is a difficult time. And during this time, because people are fighting a civil war, you have trades, or you have Japanese people who are interested in trade, so they can make money to pay their army. They're interested in getting European guns. And some of the people are also become interested in the Europeans' religion, Catholicism. And a lot of Japanese people will convert to Catholicism. So you have lots of European influence during this unstable period. Right? There's lots of European influence during this unstable period. What eventually happens is you have this guy, Tokugawa Ieyasu, who unites Japan. And he unites Japan, and so the Japanese emperor names him shogun. Now this is a guy who united the country after 150 years of civil war. So the major thing he's thinking of is, I don't want the civil war to happen again. The major thing he's thinking of, that he wants, is stability. Where did there's my good marker. This is why we need trash cans. There's no place to throw this thing. We need stability. That's what he wants. And he's afraid of instability. So he says, so that's the key thing that we just want to understand, is this guy is looking for stability. So everything he does is based on that. So he gets rid of Christianity, because he says these Christians, they follow a foreign religion led by a foreign pope. They could unite based on their religion and overthrow me. So I don't like them. I don't want guns. Guns could be used to overthrow me. Get rid of the guns. So Japan, even though they had guns, they had advanced military technology, they threw it away. The only thing that he allows, and he gets rid of the European merchants, except the Dutch. Except the Dutch. The reason he allows them to keep trading, first they agree not to try and convert people to Christianity, so they won't bring in missionaries. But the main thing, he uses the Dutch to find out what's happening in Europe. He uses the Dutch to find out what's happening in Europe to prevent an invasion. He's afraid that the Europeans will come back and try and invade Japan. And so he asks the Dutch, hey, what's going on in Europe? Every year to find out, see if there's a problem of an invasion. So essentially, you have this choice of stability over science. Stability over science. We need to be able to maintain our government against the possibility of anything that could make us unstable. And this is again, so this is where looking over the PowerPoints can kind of guide you to answer these questions and to understand the material better. That's why I had the review sheet set up like it is. This is a difficult course because of the content. There's a lot of complex content. And so I want to be very clear what it is I expect of you. And also remember, I view the test as a way to learn. The test is a way to learn. And this helps you then to learn. So let's go on to the next question. Okay, why was the spread of popular culture so important in Japan? You remember we watched this video, right, where they're talking about kabuki plays and poetry circles and things like that. Why is that important? Does anyone recall why is it important? It helps to unite the country. Right, right. It also makes it also helps, like, unites the country around the sense, we are Japanese. This is important, right? We talked about there were very high rates of literacy. And you had these plays and books and poetry circles. Even farmers were joining, wealthy farmers were joining poetry circles and exchanging this popular culture that existed throughout the whole country. It was a national popular culture, similar to what we have today. For example, if you're an American and you watch TV, you're watching the same TV here in Greenwood, South Carolina as you watch in California, as you watch in New York, as you watch in Michigan, right? You have the same kind of channels available. So it's that kind of thing. It develops this kind of national popular culture, and it gives Japanese people a sense of national identity. It gives Japanese people a sense of national identity, which is later going to be useful in developing nationalism in Japan. China will have a much harder time developing nationalism because its shared culture is for elite people. It's only mostly for the elite people, whereas in Japan, the shared culture goes throughout much of society. For the next question, again, this is where, what role did the exam system play in China? Again, this is where it's good to go back to the PowerPoint slides. Because we have a list, a numbered list. Whenever there's a numbered list, there's a very good chance that that will be on the exam. So what does the exam system do? Well, you'll recall, you could get, if you passed all 3 exams, you got to become a government official, which is the best thing you can be. The best thing you can be in Chinese civilization, Chinese culture, was to be a government official. So if you passed all 3 exams, you get a job. A good job, the best job you can have. If you only pass that first exam, though, remember, you can't be beaten by the government. There are certain taxes you don't have to pay, and you get to wear fancy clothes that tells everyone you're a scholar. So because of this, everyone wants to study for everyone who can wants to study for the exams. If you have the money and the wealth to study for the exams, you do it. That then spreads Confucian morality throughout China. It helps to keep China unified. Right? The elite, educated people believe in the same kind of morality. So this helps to unite them. And remember, this morality encourages people to be loyal to the Chinese emperor. Remember, Confucian morality emphasizes loyalty to the emperor. So you're teaching all these people, hey, you should be loyal to the emperor. So they're more likely to be loyal to the emperor, right? You spend 10, 20, 30 years learning to be loyal to the emperor, you're going to be loyal to the emperor. And anyone can take this exam. As long as you are, or I should say any male essentially can take this exam and can get some benefits. So it's better to just study for the exam than to try and rebel. You have a better chance of at least passing that first exam than having a successful rebellion. Right? Many people pass the exam, very few people actually rebel successfully. So it integrates people into the empire. Right? Anyone can take it. It's better to study and rebel than rebel. And it provides Chinese people with a sense of their Chinese identity, but mostly those people who study for the exams, right? It's not like Japanese popular culture, which is like everyone. So those are kind of the good things. It helps give Chinese people a sense of identity that helps them hold together, and it prevents rebellion, keeps the state going. This is why China is so successful at ruling such a gigantic country. I mean, China's huge, right? The size of Europe. There's many peoples in Europe. The exam system is one reason that they're able to do that so well. However, number 5 is a problem. Remember, the best thing to be is to be a government official. To be a government official, you have to study moral knowledge, not technical knowledge. If you're really smart in China, you study for the exams. If you're really smart in Europe, you study science. So because of this is one reason why China will not have the scientific revolution first. It'll be the Europeans that have the scientific revolution first. So any questions about that? Okay, that takes care of 17. Number 16. 16, notice we have a lot of questions from these early chapters. So like I said, it's good to not just focus on those. I mean, it's good to focus on those, but don't forget the newer chapters. So one quick thing we had, just as a reminder, someone asked about this, I just want us to mention it. Remember, when we're talking about Islam, Islam is the religion, Muslims are the people who follow the religion. And it's confusing because if you follow Buddhism, you're a Buddhist. If you follow Christianity, you're a Christian. On the other hand, if you follow Islam, you're a Muslim. And the reason we use that term is because that's how Muslims talk about themselves. That's the terms that Muslims themselves use. So these are words, I think they're from Arabic. So I just wanted to point that out first. Now there's this question, what were the 3 Islamic civilizations we studied, and how were their policies towards non-Muslim religions different? Okay, so can anyone tell me the name of one Muslim civilization we studied? Safavids? And I think someone said Ottomans. Thank you. Ottomans? And Mughals. Excellent. Got all 3. So we have these kind of 3 Muslim empires. And this is, again, where it's tricky, because it's very easy to confuse these 3. It's very easy to confuse these 3. So this is where note cards can really help you. If you write down Safavid Empire, write down its attributes on the back. Now the Safavid Empire, in terms of religious policy, was the Safavid Empire tolerant or intolerant? They're intolerant. Now here's the tricky thing that's important. Why are they intolerant?
Because they were Shalat Muslims? Is it a Shia?
Right, they're Shia Muslims, right? They were Shia. Why were they such strict Shia Muslims? What was the problem that the rulers of the Safavid Empire faced?
Sunni Muslims, because
Right.
they were their descendants, and then
Right.
the other ones were voted by the people.
Right, exactly. So, and that's one reason they're Shia Islam, right? Is because they have the leader claims to be the descendant of Muhammad, which is how you get to be the caliph according to Shia Islam. So that's excellent. That's excellent. And that's a good point, just to point out, right, how are Sunni and Shia Islam different from each other? It goes to that issue. They're different over how they claim to be caliph. Right? Remember, Sunni Muslims say the community decides your caliph, and as Nagasia pointed out, Shia Muslims say it's you have to be a descendant of Muhammad. And this is important because they often will fight then. Because they'll have a Sunni guy will say, I'm Caliph. A Shia guy will say, I'm Caliph. So they'll fight over who's the real Caliph. So this leads to conflict. The Safavids faced a particular problem. Remember, the Safavids were Turks ruling Persians. So you had ethnic disunity. Right? You have this kind of problem. You have ethnic disunity because you have Turks ruling Persians. The Persians could just say, why are these Turks ruling us? And if you're the Turks, you don't want them to ask that question. But if they do ask the question, the way that you answer it is you say, we're the Caliph according to Shia Islam. We're the Caliphs. Our ethnic difference doesn't matter. What matters is that we're the Caliphs, so you should listen to us. We're the successor of Muhammad. Our religion is more important than our ethnicity. So it's intolerant because they need to make everyone Shia Muslims for this to work. Right? To overcome ethnic disunity, this ethnic problem, you have to force everyone to believe in the same religion. So they're intolerant not only of Christians and Jews, they're also intolerant of Sunni Muslims. They force Sunni Muslims to become Shia Muslims. But this is why, right? Because they face this kind of issue. Okay, Ottoman, are they tolerant or intolerant?
Tolerant.
Right, they're tolerant. I like to say kind of pretty tolerant. We'll see why. They're pretty tolerant. They're fairly tolerant, we can say. I'm sorry? Exactly. And that goes to this, someone had asked, and I forgot to put it on there, the meaning of this term, people of the book. In the Quran, if you are labeled as a people of the book, you don't have to convert to Islam. You're given a choice. If you're a people of the book, you can either pay a tax or become Muslim. Right? So if you're a Christian, and Christians and Jews were people of the book. They were monotheistic people, they believed in only one God. So it wasn't okay just to kill them. You couldn't just come in and kill them. If Muslims took over a Christian country, they said to the Christians, okay, you have two choices. Pay a tax and remain Christian, or convert to Islam. So that's why I say they're pretty tolerant. But remember also, though, they forced some Christians to convert to Islam. They kidnapped some Christian children, forced them to convert to Islam, and used them as officials. So that's why they're only pretty tolerant, not really tolerant. Now, how about this last group, the Mughals? Are they tolerant or intolerant? The Mughals?
No, intolerant.
Really tolerant.
They're really tolerant. Sorry. Now, this is good. This is where it gets a little confusing. We need to keep this together. Or let me put it this way, actually. They start off really tolerant, and they stop. The last guy is intolerant. Thank you. No, that's a good point, right? They start tolerant, they end intolerant. So they're really tolerant. That's under Akbar. And then become intolerant under Aurangzeb. So if we start off, they're really tolerant under Akbar. Why is Akbar so tolerant? Is he just a nice guy? Or does he have a historical reason? Heart?
Because there were too many other types of people for him to do that, or else they would rise up and never go.
Exactly, fear of rebellion. Fear of rebellion. Erica, were you going to add to that? I'm sorry. Okay, thanks. So he's, there's a fear of rebellion because you have a Muslim minority ruling a Hindu majority. And as Hart pointed out, if you try and force all these Hindus to convert, they'll rise up and overthrow you, which they can do because there's a lot more of them than there are of you. So this is the problem the Mughals face. So this is why under Akbar, they're really tolerant. And this is why under Aurangzeb, they become intolerant. Or I'm sorry, this is why when under Aurangzeb they become intolerant, the country falls apart. Aurangzeb's, remember, he's scary and tough. He holds it together. After him, the Mughal Empire falls apart because they departed from this policy of tolerance. Right? They departed from this policy of tolerance.
The Ottomans and the Mongols, are they Shia or Sunni?
The Ottomans are Sunni. The Mughals, they're kind of their own thing. Sometimes they're identified as Sunni, but they kind of really just do their own thing because of this problem they face. They can't be that orthodox, or they're going to run into problems. Now, I'll come back to the second question in just a second. Let's stick with the Mughals. Okay, why did Jahangir take the policy towards sati that he did? Right. First of all, what's sati? This is why the terms are important.
When the husband dies, the wife burns herself.
Exactly. You have this kind of widow immolation. The widows throw themselves on the piers and burn themselves. So Jahangir, he has a problem. Jahangir is a Muslim, so he doesn't like it. Right? According to Islam, suicide is wrong. Right? Islam, suicide is wrong. You're not supposed to kill yourself, which is essentially, and this is suicide. It's also a problem from his point of view because sometimes the women are forced to do it. Sometimes you have women who are forced to do it. So as a Muslim, he doesn't like it. However, if he forbids, as Hart pointed out, you have this problem of rebellion. So what does Jahangir do?
The thing about the kids,
Right, the thing about the kids. Right, what about the kids?
they wouldn't know how to do it if you had kids.
Exactly. He restricts. Right, he has three choices. He can tolerate, he can get rid of it because he's a Muslim and he doesn't like it. But the problem is if he does that, they'll rebel. So if he tolerates it, he feels bad because he's a Muslim, he doesn't think it's right. If he tries to force Hindus, though, to stop doing it, they may rebel. That's not good. So he settles on restricting it. Right? And as Josie pointed out, he restricts it. If you're a mother and have children, you can't do it. And if you're forced, you can't do it. So he pushes as far as he can. But he can't go any further. So this is why he takes the policy towards sati that he did. Again, you see this, and the reason I think this is important is it shows people may have a religious ideal, but because of the historical context in which they live, they're limited in how they can live it out. Does anyone still need to write this down? I need to erase it, so I don't want to erase it until. Okay. I want to show you something. Here's the difficulty that you face, I think, in taking a course like this. Like I said, is all these new words, all these different terms. So I want to try and show you a trick that may help you keep these guys apart. Right? We talk about three people. There's basically three Mughal emperors we talk about. You want to make sure you remember that they're Mughal emperors, not Ottoman empires. We talk about Akbar and Aurangzeb and Jahangir. Right? Akbar is the guy that sets up tolerance. Jahangir continues, we can say, with restrictions. Aurangzeb believes in intolerance. So one thing that can kind of help you remember this, to keep this in order, is first of all A, J, A. Right? Sometimes it helps to remember it that way. The other problem that you face. I'm sorry?
I said that's the first three letters of my name.
Oh yeah, okay, that makes it very easy for you to remember, right? That's a good way also. If you can connect it to something like that, that really helps. The other thing, okay, so that helps you remember the three, but the problem is you've got these two guys, Akbar and Aurangzeb, that begin with the same letter. That's tricky. So what you do though, is remember that chronologically and alphabetically match. Akbar comes before Aurangzeb, K comes before you. K comes before you. And that can help you remember. Akbar is tolerant, so everything holds together. Aurangzeb leaves that policy of intolerance, and then things fall apart. I'm sorry, leaves that policy of tolerance, in favor of intolerance, and then everything falls apart. You could almost say also, kill you, to remember intolerance, right? K-U, kill you. Those little games can help you sometimes remember this stuff, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. If it helps you remember it, it works. Sometimes the sillier, the better. But it's important to remember these guys are Mughals. And you want to remember that how they're different, and this can kind of help you to do that, to kind of fix those things in your mind. Okay. Any questions on that before we take the question of Constantinople? Okay. So moving on, we had this question: why was the fall of Constantinople important for the Ottoman Empire? There's essentially two reasons for the Ottoman Empire. Or we'll say there's actually kind of three. Okay, what's one beneficial thing that happens to the Ottoman Empire because it takes Constantinople?
They can control trade.
Control trade, exactly. What else does it allow them to do?
Dominate both seas.
Right, they can dominate both seas. Exactly, that's connected to trade. And what does dominating both seas, what else does that allow them to do now that they've got the seas? They dominate the trade, and what else can they do?
Explore.
Not explore. That's good though that you hit on that. They don't go out exploring. They do expand. Right, no, that's good, that's good. I'm glad you brought that up. But right, exactly, Brandon said they can expand. Right, they control this very important strategic city that joins Asia and Europe together. So that allows them to expand into Europe safely because they control that important city. They can expand to Europe, no problem. And also, if they want to, they can pull forces away and expand into Africa and the Middle East because they got that fortress to defend their rest of their land from the Europeans. So it allows them to expand. And what does Mehmet the Conqueror, right? He's the guy that conquers Constantinople. Ashley?
Turns into that big church into a mosque.
Right, he changes that big church into a mosque, right? Remember, this shows Muslim dominance over the Christians, right? Exactly. Mehmet the Conqueror comes in, changes that church into a mosque, and then he declares himself, begins with the C, Caliph. Right, he declares himself Caliph. Right, it's at this point, this really strengthens Ottoman rule because they can claim now their Sultan is the successor of Muhammad, and the Muslim community, at least the Sunni Muslims, agree. So they say, look, as Ashley pointed out, he took this great church and made it into a mosque.
Got the church where they covered the faces and.
Exactly. Yeah, Church of the Holy Wisdom, I think, Hagia Sophia. So that's what happens with the Ottomans. For the Christians, of course, they're freaked out by this, but they react to number one in particular. What do they do? Reaction number one. Go explore, exactly. They explore to find new trade routes. If Constantinople wouldn't have fallen when it did, the Europeans may not have gone out to explore to find new trade routes. It's really fascinating to me. Yes, Ashley.
I have a question. Isn't it the reason why their science expanded so much because they had to build better ships and stuff like that to transport?
Exactly. That's also one reason why the Western countries will develop science, is because they have to develop these ships that can go out, and also because they have to develop navigational instruments, which you need to know math and astronomy to do that. So exactly, you're right. There's a connection between exploration and science as well. So it also helps to do that. But these are the four I'm particularly concerned about. Okay. Now this first question looks a little complex. What was the connection between religion, war, centralized governments, and exploration in Europe? It is a little complex, but this is again where the PowerPoints can help us. So let's see. So the connection was religion, war, centralized states, exploration. Okay. Remember, you have in the Iberian Peninsula, this place was originally Christian. It gets conquered by the Muslims in the 700s, and the Christians try and retake it. And there's 700 years of fighting between Christians and Muslims. That's the religion and the war. Because of this religious difference, I'm Catholic, you're Muslim, we're going to fight to see who's going to win, that you have war. So religious difference, religious conflict leads to war. Religious difference, religious contact leads to war. Okay, you have a war now. If you want to win a war, you need army. If you want an army, you need money. If you want money, you need taxes. And if you want taxes, you need a centralized state. The only way, people don't want to pay taxes. You have to force people to pay taxes. You have to be powerful to make people pay taxes. So you need a strong government that can make people pay taxes so that you can have the soldiers you need to win the war. Right, so a centralized state is necessary to raise taxes to pay for an army to win the war that you're fighting over religion. So how does exploration come in? These ships are expensive. You can't just go out and buy one of these ships if you're an individual person. You need a lot of money. So strong centralized states allow the funding of voyages of exploration. The money that you use, the tax structure, the centralized government you set up to raise the taxes, to pay your army to win the war, you can also use that same money to go exploring. So you use that same centralized state, that same administrative structure, to raise the money to go out and go exploring.
Would that be the gotta spend money to make money type thing?
In a sense, yes. Right, you're investing. You can think of these trade routes, these voyages of exploration are an investment. Because if you find a new trade route, you're going to make a lot of money. And I'm glad that makes a good segue, I think, into the next question. The next question was, what was the nature of the Portuguese trading empire in Asia? Now, one thing, I maybe shouldn't have used the word nature. I think some people had some confusion with the term. Nature means characteristics. What are the characteristics of the Portuguese trading empire in Asia? What are the characteristics? So let's go, and this is where it's helpful. There's a slide, nature of the Portuguese trade. So this is where it helps. One thing I really want to encourage you to do, sometimes I think we have a tendency not to read the titles, we just read the content. Look at the titles. I sometimes had to think for quite a while, okay, how am I going to title this? So the titles are important. Right, so the Portuguese, they're part of the people who are exploring to find this new trade route, right? They're one of these centralized states that's exploring, trying to find a new trade route. And they do find a new trade route, right? They go around Africa to India. The Portuguese go around Africa to India. But here's the problem that the Portuguese have. Europeans don't have anything that Asians want. The Europeans don't have anything that Asians want. Remember, China and India are these very wealthy, powerful countries. The Chinese and India have everything they need. So the problem is the Portuguese can't find anything to trade with them. So the Portuguese have to buy things at first with money. This is bad, right? You don't want to spend silver, which you only have a limited amount of, to buy tea, which you just grow more of every year. Right? This is bad for the Portuguese. Well, here's what the Portuguese do. The people who are trading, you notice there's trade routes all around Asia. The people who are actually buying and moving the goods are mostly Muslim traders. They're mostly Muslims who are, Muslims will buy stuff from China, bring it to Southeast Asia, bring it to India, and then come back. So this is Muslim traders mostly. Well, of course, remember the Portuguese are the enemies of Muslims, right? The Portuguese see Muslims as the enemy of Christ and his holy church, is how the Portuguese would see them. So they just attack the Muslims and take over their business. So instead of trying to bring things from Europe to sell to Asians, they just bring Chinese products to India to sell to Indians, and then Indian products to China to sell to Chinese, They move silk from Japan to China and so forth. So they sell Asian goods to each other, and they make a profit each voyage, and then every so often they go back to Portugal and bring the money back to Portugal. So they become traders of Asian goods, right? They become mover of Asian goods, not European goods, Asian goods. And also what they'll do is they'll take over little cities, strategic cities, and then charge taxes. And they'll use those as their trade areas. So for example, they take Goa. There's a huge number of Catholics in Goa, even though there's not many Catholics in India. There's a huge number in Goa because it was Portuguese. And then they'll take these things and trade it. Or then they'll charge people taxes to come into Goa, and they'll make money that way as well. But at this point, they're too weak to actually take over complete countries. They'll take a few cities, but that's all they can do. They would only take over cities. They can't take over complete countries. That won't happen until the 19th century. And eventually the Dutch will push the Portuguese out. And again, it's a religious conflict. The Dutch are Protestant Christians. They can kick out those bad Catholics anytime they want. Of course, that's how they view it. I'm not saying the Catholics are bad. Right. So I just want to, just what I was saying, this kind of illustrates my point, though, why it's good. Notice on chapter 16, people had questions on 4. Chapter 14 and 15, people had questions on only 2. No one had a question on chapter 18. I didn't have anyone ask me any questions on chapter 18. I think it's because people feel pretty confident with it, but just be careful because that can be kind of a false confidence. Yes, Lou.
I'm sorry, just a quick question.
Sure.
You say the Dutch eventually kicked the Portuguese out.
Yeah, mostly.
Is this at the same time that the Japanese shogun is only accepting Dutch people?
Exactly. That's a good connection you just made. Right. That's when the Dutch. What happens initially, the shoguns are first willing to tolerate the Catholics because they think it's necessary for trade. Then the English and the Dutch get there. They're like, oh, we don't need those Catholics anymore. So, exactly. I mean, that's when the Dutch are coming in on the scene. So chapter 18, no one had questions, so we'll go back. There's one question on 19, so we'll do that, and then we'll go answer these. Someone asked the question, what were the positive and negative results of the Industrial Revolution? This is, again, where it's good to go back to the PowerPoint. So the good things, right? Improvement in quality of life. People can get new products that they couldn't get before and at lower prices. So you can get new things and more of old things. So this is good. You get products you couldn't get before, right? So that's a benefit. Both you can get things get cheaper and you can afford them. There's also new opportunities. Remember, you have a labor market, so you can go sell your labor wherever you can get the most money for it. So if you're in Japan and you can't make very much money because there's too much labor, you can go to Brazil where there's a demand for labor and sell your labor there. And Chinese can do that in California, Indians can do it in South Africa, and so forth. So you have new opportunities. People can buy new products and more products, and people can have new opportunities to improve their lives. And you also have this rise of this new class of people giving even more opportunities, right? You have these educated people, lawyers, accountants, clerks, teachers, physicians, government officials. This opens more opportunities for people. And this includes opportunities for women. Now they're limited, but they're still there. The problems, though, you have separation of work and home. People used to be able to be together to work. People used to be able to work together in their homes when they worked on the farm, but now mom may go to factory A, dad may go to factory B, and the children may go to factory C, and grandma's home alone. You're also dependent on the world market. So what happens in another country affects you in ways that you maybe don't understand. So for example, I think recently in the newspaper, they're going to, if you go near Lander, you can see the old smokestack of the textile factory. They're finally going to knock that thing down. Because I think in the 40s, well, maybe it's 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, this was a thriving mill town. They made lots of cloth here. And people, that you could work hard and you could make a good living. And then it became cheaper to make those products elsewhere. And these people who were doing a good job all of a sudden lose their jobs. Right? This is very traumatic and upsetting if you're those people, right? It's like, well, we didn't do anything wrong, and we just lost our jobs. That's kind of the problem. right? You become dependent on this world market, and if things change, you have these poor people who, through no fault of their own, lose their jobs. Of course, entire families must work to survive, including children, and people aren't paid much, right? Real wages don't begin to rise until 1850. And this is part because there's a pressure to get workers to work as much as possible for as cheaply as possible. So, yes, Ashley.
What's a triad?
Okay, triads. Let's review triads real quick. A triad, this is your writing, right? This is going to be the written part of the assignment. What will happen, I'll give you 3 terms. These will be selected from the terms section. And what you need to do is tell me how those 3 terms, what they are, and how they're connected. So the 2 examples I gave in class, one was roots, trunks, and leaves, right? Those are all parts of a tree. They all have different functions. So that's how you explain it. The other example was president, king, shogun. And the way to kind of answer these, and these are all rulers. So one way to kind of think about how to answer these questions, ask yourself, what do they have in common? And that helps you identify them, right? They're all leaders, right? What do they have in common? Then how are they different, right? They're different in how they're selected. And that's something that can help you answer that question. So, right, so that's...
Is there only one of them?
There will only be one triad, one set of 3 terms. So one thing, it's good, and like I said, those are selected from the terms section, which is also what matching is from. So please pay close attention to those. That's where note cards can help you. Because, for example, if Akbar is on the test, and you think that he's the same as Aurangzeb, and that he's an Ottoman, that's really going to hurt you. So you want to make sure you identify these guys very closely. But those are all, it's written on the test who they are, and you can find that by looking back at the PowerPoints. Right? We have about 2 more minutes, so let me just go show you 19 and 18. We'll see if we have any questions on those. If we don't, we will be done. So let's see some, oops, sorry. Okay. Chapter 19. Going once, going twice. Chapter 18. Oh, just so you know, this came up in the other class. What ideal did the French Revolution spread? Mostly what I'm looking for is equality, the notion of equality. Even when it was a democracy, even though when France was ruled by an empire, they still had this notion of equality, right? But remember, it was all men are equal, right? Women didn't get the right to vote. Men were equal. All men were equal. All men had the right to vote. Didn't matter whether they were young men, whether they were old men. All of them got the right to vote.
Is that when the woman came in and she was like, it's not fair?
Right, that's when Olympia comes in, and that's also when Charlotte Corday comes in. You want to make sure you can differentiate. Excellent. Well, on that note, good luck, and I will see you all on Monday. And there's Monday. Sure. Sure. Today's a little tricky because I'm supposed to take a faculty member from